Hello knitting friends. Do you have little fur babies in your life and you still don't have these fun, adorable pet stockings for them? Well, you better get them on your knitting needles stat because Christmas is just around the corner. These knit up really fast and quick, and I've got full instructions in my video. So let's get started. Let's get started in knitting up these cute, adorable pet stockings just in time for Christmas. We are going to knit them flat on a flat needle and just seam up the edge so there's no complicated knitting in the round if you're uncomfortable with that. We are going to use a double knitting technique to knit this really super thick and plush cuff to the stocking, then knit the stocking, a turn for the heel, and close it up with a toe. Now you can be really creative and add at the end of your stocking some embroidery to put a name of a pet name if you like on it, or you could just leave it plain. I think they look cute both ways. So I'll leave that up to you if you want to add some extra decorative features to the stocking. But let's get going with this. I'm just going to be using a flat US size 7 needle and 2 colors of worsted weight yarn. I'll use the ivory for the cuff and then this pretty green color for the rest of the stocking, but you can choose your own fun Christmas colors however you'd like. I'm going to cast on a total of 72 stitches for this stocking. Now there's really only going to be 36 stitches for the width of the stocking body, but for the cast on, since we're doing this double knitting here, we actually need to cast on twice as many stitches as that's required for the rest of our project because we are actually knitting both sides of the fabric. So you need twice as many stitches, but it makes for a really fun double knitted cuff. So let's do that. You can use any cast on method you choose. For this project, I am going to do the long tail cast on method. If you need a refresher on how to do the long tail, I'll have a link in the upper right hand corner for you to check out. But let's cast on our 72 stitches. And then we'll come back and I'll show you how to do that fun double knitting cuff. Now that I've casted on 72 stitches, we can begin to knit the cuff of this beautiful pet stocking. So now the knitted cuff is actually going to be a double knitted cuff, which means we got stocking knit stitch on both sides for an extra thick cuff. It's a really pretty stitch and it's super simple to do. So here's how we're going to do that. We're going to start the first in every row with a basic knit stitch, 1 knit stitch. Then the next stitch, I want you to bring your yarn to the front and then slip that stitch purlwise off the needle. We're not knitting it, we're just slipping it with the yarn in front. Now bring it back to the yarn back to the back so we can do our next knit stitch. And yarn in front again, purlwise, slip it. So that is a 2 stitch repeat. We're going to continue all the way through this whole cuff. Knitting 1 with yarn in front, slip 1 purlwise. So let's do that to the end of this row and then with actually every single row for the length of the cuff, and then we'll come back and get started with the rest of the stocking. All right, I have finished this really pretty double-sided stockinette stitch that we're using for the cuff. You'll notice that each side has the stockinette stitch present. It was really easy to do, right? We just knitted 1 and then slipped 1 purlwise with the yarn in front for our cuff here. So now this was 72 stitches that we casted on, and we needed that many stitches because there's actually a stitch for each stitch in the front and then a stitch in the back. So now we need to switch to our main color for our stocking and then reduce the number of stitches on our needles by half. So we can cut this yarn off because we are done with the white. Leave a fairly long tail because we're going to need some tail to seam in that little bit of the cuff. And now we'll switch to our new color. I'm going to switch to the green. I'm actually going to use quite a long tail for the start of this green color because I want to use this tail to seam in our edge when we're done. So I'm going to wrap it around my pinky here to give it a little stability. And now the very first row with this new color, we are going to knit 2 together all the way across this first row, and that will reduce the number of stitches by half. So let's take with our new color, we're going to knit 2 together. So knit the first 2 stitches together in 1 swoop and bring them together off the needle, knit 2 together, and we'll do that all the way to the end of this first row. All right, finishing up here with our last knit 2 together. Now we only have 36 stitches on the needle, and that is what we need for the body of the stocking. So now this is our wrong side. You can tell by the stitching here. So now we're going to just continue with the body of the stocking by doing a stockinette stitch. So that means knitting 1 row and purling the 2nd row, and we're going to do that for a total of, I believe it's 30 rows. Okay, so this is, since we just did a knit row, our next row is going to be purl. So I will continue this for 30 rows. That will be the body of the, or the leg of the stocking, and then we will do the really fun part, which is do the short rows for the turning of the heel. So I will be back when I'm done with my 30 rows. Okay, I've completed a total of 30 rows of stockinette stitch where I knitted 1 row and then the next row purled all stitches. So now we are ready to do the fun part, which is to do a couple rows where we're going to turn the work to produce this heel effect on the stocking. So that's done with a version of the short rows. It's not difficult to do, but I will explain through it row by row so you know exactly how to get that nice little heel turn. So the very first row in our heel work here is that we're going to knit 20 stitches. So we'll knit 20. Stitches here, and now we're going to actually, instead of finishing the row, we're actually going to turn our work and continue to knit even though we're not at the end of the row. So we're going to turn our work, and now we are going to continue to knit but purl, because we're on the purl side of the fabric, and we're going to purl 6 stitches and then turn our work again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 stitches. And now we are going to turn our work again. And now we're going to knit 8 stitches. 7, 8, and we're going to continue to do this, knitting a few, turning it, purling a few for quite a few rows. So let's keep going. All right, now we're going to turn our work for the last time, and now we are going to purl all the way to the end of the row. So now we're going to actually complete our row of purling. All right, let's get a couple more purl stitches to the end of this row, and let's see what we've got here. So now you can see that we've got this little bump out for the heel. That's how what short rows will do when you're knitting it, is that it will start to pull the fabric out, and that's how you can create a heel in your fabric. So now we're going to continue again, just working stockinette stitch, knitting the first row, purling the second row, and we're going to do this for a total of 20 rows for the actual foot of the stocking. And then we'll come back and do our decreases for the toe. All right, 20 rows of stockinette stitch is complete to complete the length for our foot of the stocking. Now we're going to do a few decrease rows with decrease stitches to decrease it for the toe, and then we will wrap up the knitting part, and then we'll work on seaming the sides together. So the first row of decrease is going to involve knitting 1, knit 1, and then the next stitch is going to be a knit 2 together. So knit these 2 stitches together. And we'll do that sequence to the end of the row. So knitting 1 and then knit 2 together. And then when we're done with this row of knitting 1 and knitting 2 together, we're going to, of course, purl on the way back. And then we're going to repeat this row one more time. Another row of knitting 1, knitting 2 together, then purling on the way back. And then we'll just have one more row of decrease after that. Now that I've completed 2 of those decrease rows where I knitted 1 and knit 2 together, then I purled and I did another decrease row, and then purled again. Now I'm ready to do my final decrease row, which is going to consist of knitting 2 together all the way to the end of the row. So we're going to knit 2 together for the first 2 stitches and continue that all the way to the end of this row. And that will be our final row of knitting. Okay, so now we have 8 stitches left on our needle, and now we're going to just cut off the tail, take a tapestry needle, thread it onto the needle, and now we're going to transfer these stitches off the needle and onto, or off the knitting needle and onto my tapestry needle, one by one. And then we just can simply just kind of pull it snug, and that's going to close up the toe. And now you can see when we fold it over, it's starting to look like a real stocking. So now all that's left is to seam this edge, and I'm going to show you a very special, very seamless stitch that we can do to seam this edge together, which hardly makes it visible at all. It's very seamless. So let's take a look at that next. All right, we are ready to seam together our stocking. So I put it inside out with my right sides together, and obviously this is the edge we're going to seam. Now I've got a very great seaming stitch that produces a very invisible stitch. You cannot see the results at all. So if you notice that this is curling quite a bit because of the stockinette stitching here, but if you uncurl it as much as possible and look at the very edge of your stitching, you'll notice that you've got a series of dashes and bumps. Bump, dash, bump, dash, bump in that ridge. Similarly on the other side, if you uncurl it all the way, you'll see that same dash, bump on that side. Now we're going to be seaming our stitches, or pulling our stitches through the dashes of these edges, not the bumps. Okay, and that will produce us as a very seamless stitch. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to start up here by the cuff because that's where I strategically placed my nice long tail. I put it on a darning needle here, and now we're going to connect the two. Make sure I keep this unraveled because we want to make sure we're using that very last ridge. I'm just going to connect these 2 edges through that first set of dashes that I see. Pull the yarn through, and then on the side that I just came out on, I'm going to go into my next dash. So here's the bump, here's my dash. I'm going to go into the next dash of yarn. I'm calling them bumps and dashes here, and I'm going to go back through the same dash that I previously used up here. Okay, so pull through that. You can give it a little tug. Now I'm going to, on this side now, go in through the next dash, bump, dash, and go in back through the previous dash that I used right here. And let me do that again now. We're going to go into the next dash and back out through the previous dash I used. And that is the series. You can see that, I know this is with the same color so it's hard to see, but you can see that my stitching is kind of doing this loop-de-loop-de thing, and that's the pattern that you want to follow. You can pull it a little snugger every once in a while, but we'll go do a few more stitches in through this dash, out through the previous dash, in through the next dash, out through the previous dash. So let me do that all the way to the end of the toe. Then we will jump back up here and seam this little bit of the cuff with the color of the cuff. All right, I've completed my seam of the main body of the stocking, so now we're just going to do the same thing to close up the little bit of seam here by the cuff using the same color as the cuff. So let's get that on a darning needle. And we're going to follow the same principle, although because this is a little different stitch, we don't have the bumps and dashes that we worked with on the main body, but I'm going to use the same principle just with this very outside edge of the knit stitches here. So let's connect the two here through that dash, and then we're going to go through the stitches in a similar way. So I'm going to go in the next loop and out through the one that we previously went in. So basically the same thing, we're just not, we don't have those bumps and dashes to work with, but that's okay. This will produce the same result. So let's finish up this little seam, and then we'll just finish up by adding the little loop to hang the stocking. Okay, you can see that the seaming that I did here on the stocking is really pretty invisible. It's hard to see, so it's a great stitch to do to seam up this piece. So now we're just going to do the final little touch and add a little loop to the top of the stocking so you have a way to hang it somewhere for Christmas. And I like to do that with just a simple crochet chain. So I'm going to start with making a little slip knot here onto my crochet hook. And then since I want the loop to be on this corner here, I'm going to go to the inside, and just to one side of that edge, I'm going to place that crochet hook in one of that first stitch there on that side. And then I'm just going to loop that crochet hook through here and get the tail out of the way, and through my slip knot there, both through those. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the very top stitch. So I'm kind of securing it in there twice through that top stitch, and then loop it around through both of those stitches. And at this point I'm going to just do a simple crochet chain for 15 stitches, or however long you want your loop to be. And now we're going to connect the end of my loop to the base here again. So I'm going to now go into one of those top stitches of the top of the stocking. And secure it there on the top. And then also secure it also one stitch below, just so it gives it a good connection to the cuff. And there we go. So now I can kind of pull this loose. Trim that off, pull that all the way through, and now just weave in these two little tails that you have. You can just weave them in down below on the stocking. But there you got a little loop to hang it with. And there we go. Finished stocking for your pet, for your little furry friends, or for your friends' furry friends. However you want to use these for Christmas, they make a wonderful addition for your holiday, and will make your pet really happy that he's got something for Santa to put gifts in. Now, if you're versed on some embroidery or finishing type work, you can of course personalize it with a pet's name on it, but that is up to you. You can just leave them plain like this as well. I think these make just really adorable pieces for Christmas. Hope you found this helpful. If so, please give me a like, and don't forget to subscribe to receive notifications of new videos all about knitting tips and stitches and creative patterns like these fun stockings. Thanks for watching, everyone. Happy knitting.